back on the little Kubota. I broke this video up into two parts. Hopefully you saw my first part of the video. We were having overheating issues with the engine. When I did a compression check, there was no compression. So we actually did like a little in-frame rebuild, honed out the cylinders, put a new head gasket on, just made sure everything was good there. And I was afraid of this, but the oil pump is actually what was bad. That's what took out the pistons initially, no oil. So did just a little bit of cranking after we did this rebuild, got no oil here. And you can see right there, that is where the oil pressure sending unit is supposed to be. I had that out, and with just a little bit of cranking on it, no oil's coming out at all. So we have no oil pressure on the engine. That means it's time to come in here, pull everything out, and we're gonna check out the oil pump. All right, here it is sitting on the bench, and we'll get ready to disassemble. The oil pump is right in here. Here are some of the clearances that we're going to be shooting for. One for the inner rotor to the outer rotor to the pump body, and then we'll put the cover back on, and we'll use our plastic gauge again, and we're going to shoot for a clearance on that. So let's go ahead and check these out. So here's our oil pump with our cover off. And basically what you're testing is you want to check this outer, so the housing to the outer ring, and that is supposed to be 2 to 7 thousandths, somewhere in between there. And then the next spot you're going to want to test is between the teeth, so in a spot like that, and that little gap right there is supposed to be 3 to 7 thousandths, so you want it on the lower end, the better. And then finally you can see right here, I've kind of been messing with it, and so it's sort of out of itself. But if I turn that back, there we go. You can see there, I went ahead and took some of our plastic gauge, and that is supposed to be the clearance there in millimeters is supposed to be 0.025 to 0.075. And that, I think, is the measurement that we are out on. We are right at the very limit of that. And so just kind of between those combinations, that must be why we are not getting oil. I did check our relief valve. That seems like that's fine. And so we have a new part there coming. And then we'll see if we need to take down this just a little bit, because you can see there just a little bit of wear. Again, you can see that plastic gauge and that gap. So that's the oil pump. The new one should be here shortly. We'll put it in and remeasure everything. Dropped the new one in, it came. And so right now we've got our 3 thousandths feeler gauge, and that fits into our outer, from our housing to our outer ring. And that's right on the low end of where it's supposed to be. So that's real good. That's nice and tight. That was supposed to be 3 to 7 thousandths. Now our inner, where our inner was really close to being, well, it was on the outside edge of the spec last time. Here, there's our 4 thousandths feeler gauge, and then we go to our 5, and we are tight. So we actually gained some in between the inner and outer. So now we'll rotate this around and get our cover cleaned, put that back on with some plastic gauge, and we'll check how tight it is. So there is our plastic gauge. I have marked the housing so I know where that little spot is, and now I can just go ahead and drop that in, and I know that it's in the right location. We'll go ahead and torque it down with our bolts. So there is our little plastic gauge, and if we put our gauge on it, we really didn't gain much there. And I was kind of expecting that because the housing, the top of the housing is actually wore. So we can kind of see some of that wear right there. You can even see some of the lines in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the pins from this housing,
We'll take it with some very fine sandpaper. I've got a machinist block, which is perfectly flat. And basically we're just gonna do this. We're gonna lightly sand that thing down, just take a little bit of that surface down to get rid of some of these little fine scratches. Once we do that, we'll check it again and see if we gain any. So got everything put back together, torqued down. You can see there is our plastic gauge on both surfaces. And when I put my gauge on there, we're right in the middle. So the tolerance was supposed to be 0.025 to 0.075 millimeters. And we are right in the middle at 0.051 basically on our little gauge there. So this is good. I wish it was a little bit tighter, but it's in good shape. So we're gonna go ahead and put all this back together now. We'll clean off our plastic gauge, lube this up nicely, and then start putting this thing back together. Before I completely seal this up, I went ahead and I took some of my assembly lube and kind of packed it down into the bottom, and then I just put a little bit in each of them, and then I just took some of my fresh motor oil and gave it a little coat. I'm just gonna wipe that excess off so everything seals down tight. And you can see I got a little bit of oil already kind of on the one side, a little bit here. Some of that's gonna dribble out, but I'm gonna try to keep that nice and lubricate it. I'm also gonna pressurize this system before we start cranking on it. So we'll go ahead and put the cover back on now, button this end of it up. Getting ready to put the cover on. One thing I recommend, make sure you lube up that seal real good. The other thing is you gotta kind of maybe adjust the oil pump a little bit to get it to slide onto the shaft. That's not such a big deal. This right here is though. So this is my second time putting it on because I forgot that bolt right down there in the corner is behind that bracket. Now I could have taken all those brackets off and all the alternator and the AC stuff, but I didn't. So you make sure you put that bolt in the housing before you slide that all up in there, because you will not get it in around that bracket, or at least I could. All right, with the oil pan back on, it's time to put some oil in this thing and see if that oil pump is good. We got everything back together, and so what you'll see right here, that is our oil pressure port. And so I have hooked up to it a gauge, so I can actually monitor the oil pressure with this gauge, but then this is also set up so that I can pressurize the system with oil. So I got about 22 pounds on this right now, and what I'm going to do is put 2.5 quarts of oil through this thing using this. That way the entire system is primed. So I'm still putting in oil, and every once in a while you can see right along the rocker arms there's a little drip, so you can see we got oil coming out of all these little weep holes. That's all fresh oil, clean oil. So that's a good sign, and we've got oil actually kind of starting to make its way back down in. So I think everything up here looks pretty good. We'll button up a few more things, and then we'll be ready to crank on it, see what we get for oil pressure. So we'll let that finish putting that 2.5 quarts in, check the dipstick, see how much more we need to add. All right, I was a little bit concerned because this thing was pegging out my needle, but then I remembered I only have a 30 PSI gauge, and the oil pressure range is actually 28 to like 60 on this engine. So I think we got a good, healthy oil pump now. I'm happy with that. Fires right up every time. So put the exhaust back on this, and now let's see if we can break in those rings.